This is your last chance. After this...
Or should we not follow the advice of the galactically stupid?
That is a nice boulder.
Ludicrous speed! Go!
Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you pre-recorded from two undersized apartments in New York City, it's Revenge of the Film Nerds.
There, we're in a tight spot.
I hate when people talk during the movie.
With your hosts, Black Crystal.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
And Jack Manley.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
A podcast for nerds by nerds.
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Failure is not an option.
And now, here are your hosts, Black Crystal and Jack Manley.
Hello, what's up everybody, and thank you guys so much for joining us today on our 5th episode of Revenge of the Film Nerds. I'm Black Crystal, and joined with me today is the lovely, the extraordinary, manly Jack Manley. I love saying it that way.
I'm glad that people are finally starting to take to it like that. You know, it makes good for my wrestling career. But, you know, I am excited. I'm amped up as you sound, BK, because we're talking about a really fun film this week. What we got for him?
Oh, we've got a spicy one for the 5th episode. We have The Fifth Element. So exciting. Oh my gosh, this sci-fi extraordinarily amazing opera is what I say, because I have to have those adjectives in the middle, because it's not just an amazing opera. It's extraordinarily amazing space opera. And my God, I have not seen it since I was a kid. So my experience watching it with the community was crazy. I don't know, Space. How did you think I took it? Is the question.
It was fun to open this up to the group to watch, because Fifth Element has always been to me one of those movies that is, you know, quintessential popcorn. You put it on with a good group of people and you just kick back, relax, and have a lot of fun watching sci-fi. And, you know, we've done some heady films in this space, but BK, what's wrong with just sitting down and enjoying a good film?
Absolutely nothing. And this was exactly what it was. It was very, I don't know, fulfilling. I was perfectly whelmed. I don't know how else to describe my experience of watching this.
Perfectly whelmed.
Well, real quick before we get into the ins and outs of this and the nitty gritty, let's give a little recap for those of you who have yet to see this film. I'm eyeballing you. Go watch it. A quick little synopsis about the movie.
Yes, indeed. Let's get that BK synopsis going.
BK synopsis. All right. I have a new song every time, guys. All right. Dun, dun, dun. The universe is under threat of annihilation from a dark power that can only be subdued by a weapon of good. Powered by the elements and the spirit of the supreme being, when the power source of the weapon goes missing on the eve of our destruction, only hope is a down-and-out retired military man who had just the girl of his dreams fall through the roof of his cab.
Ooh. That's a good way to. That is really good. Give yourself a pat on the back for that one, BK.
Thank you.
Is one thing we noticed, and first off, we should give credit where it's due. This film was directed by French director Luc Besson. It was his original story concept, and he wrote it with Robert and Mark Kamen, and it was produced by Patrice Ledoux of Gaumont Pictures over in France. And I'm impressed that you were able to get the film condensed down like that, because there is so much that goes on with this film in terms of character development, in terms of where the story goes, and it has a lot of high ideals and high themes discussed in it. And so I think you've done quite a good job there of getting to the nitty gritty.
Oh man, you're giving me all this praise, and I'm like, yo, you work on this too, Jack. Don't downplay yourself. Oh, come on.
I know, but I work on it from my own nerdom. I work on it from that, that background. I work on that from that film history perspective. And Fifth Element is a good one to discuss in conjunction with film history a little bit, because you mentioned it. It is absolutely in that space opera tradition. It comes from the Buck Rogers, the Star Wars of the world. It's very much in that style. But this is, it might shock some people to realize, this is a French film. It was made by a French studio. It was shot in England only after they couldn't find a space to shoot it in Paris. But it is a uniquely French production. And BK, how much do you know about French cinema? Because there's a lot to unpack here regarding the history of that tradition.
So I'm glad you asked me, because you were saying who wrote it and directed and produced it. And I'm like, Ledoux? That sounds very French to me, okay? So I'm like, I never see French stuff like this. I really haven't. I've done a little bit of random works. I can't even remember the names right now because they were for like some random course in college, but nothing where I've been explored, or nothing that would be on this caliber. It's Fifth Element. Like, who would have thought that wasn't, actually like American or something like that? I don't know. Maybe I'm biased. I don't know.
No, you're not biased at all, BK. It is much more in keeping with the American traditions of cinema than with the history of what France has produced. France, it's important as a country for film because it is the place where cinema really was born. The work of the Lumiere brothers, particularly in the 1890s, really set the stage for some cornerstones of how we shoot films to this day, especially documentary work, in the way that they just observed life and pointed a camera at things they thought they would be interesting. But as French cinema developed over the 20th century, it was not about these big budget productions. France has always been the land of the auteur. It is synonymous with the French New Wave movement of the 60s and 70s. When you think France, you think Jean-Luc Godard, you think Francois Truffaut, you think these big giants of very creator-driven cinema. In the same way that we like talking about New Hollywood here because of the fact that the inmates got to run the asylum, France has always been motivated by strong creative talent over corporate need for film to make money. And so to see a film like Fifth Element emerge from a very personal tradition is kind of an interesting bit of circumstance. You would just not expect this film to come from France, BK.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because I'm like sitting here and I'm like, I'm remembering the stuff it was very that I've seen that has been French done, and it's very smaller budget. It's very realistic. Like, they are the best at working with what they've got, and it's very raw and very like interpretive. And like, this is cash sellout. I mean, what do we see in it? We saw McDonald's in it. Like, we know they had the money bags on this one.
They had to. They absolutely had to. But in order to get that kind of bankroll, it was a real process for Besson. Now, BK, would you believe that? Listen, this film came out when Luc Besson was 38 years old. Would you believe he'd been working on this concept since he was 16?
Okay, so when you first say that, I'm a little shocked, but also, I mean, it makes sense. It is such a well thought out world that it had to have been many years in the making.
Well, what I love about it is in kind of that French New Wave style and kind of that way in which these, films from France have always gone out and experimented a little bit with their means. This started out as an experiment for Luc Besson in a lot of ways. Is when he was a teenager, he created the concept and the world of Fifth Element quite literally to alleviate his own boredom. I mean, think about that. Like, how many times as a kid have you come up with a concept or an idea, just play and pretend with yourself, and you get into a concept like that? Luc Besson did that, but he decided he was going to take that to the next level and hash it out as a whole script.
That's crazy. That's a feat. Also, we learned a little bit about the difference between like script writing and like just being a writer on the Blurred Girl Live on the OS channel. And a whole process of script writing is totally different. We were told by a lot of writers who were featured on that show how turning a work or turning an idea or even a novel into something that is scripted in order for it to be produced in some sort of medium, it is a whole other process. So I can only imagine this 16-year-old kid being like, I'm imagining this beautiful space opera that's, Star Wars adjacent, and now being like, no, let's actually write it down to the T in scripting format so we can actually get this baby alive and well. What kind of kid are you? Who raised you? Okay, you French people are mad weird, all right? I mean, I say that in the nicest way too. Like, y'all need to like go do something, okay? Like,
Well, they are doing so. What he is doing here is committing to the art. But I love that you bring up that point about the difference between physically writing out a story concept and writing out a script, because it is a big one. It gets back to what we talked about with Lucas, Spielberg, and Kasdan on Raiders of the Lost Ark last week. Is Lawrence Kasdan, he became proficient as a screenwriter because he could do that dirty work. He could do the groundwork of putting all of these conceptualizations by Spielberg and Lucas onto a script, put them into a story in an economical way. Here, Luc Besson, he had that youthful enthusiasm, but this, really was a pet project for him. By the time he had a script that he was willing to show people, it had ballooned all the way to 400 pages. Now, just to give people a frame of reference there, 1 page of script typically equals 1 minute of screen time. So if this had been a 400-page affair, this would have been a 6+ hour space opera. that is Apocalypse Now levels of crazy there, BK.
I'm dying. Can you imagine that? Like, I don't know if my body could handle the theater. I can barely do all of the Lord of Rings in succession. Like, I don't think I could do a space opera that long, bro. Like, I'm not ready.
I mean, there was a time when you had those 3.5 hour epics be the, we're haute couture in Hollywood, but they even had an intermission. I can't imagine doing an intermission in the 90s, but Besson really had a genuine investment here. He just had to find ways of paring it down, but he didn't quite get to that step in first putting this film together in the early 90s. What happened is that he kind of fell into a fortuitous series of meeting creatives that he ended up wanting to work with. This was the period of time that Gaumont jumped into the project, and Patrice Ledoux started producing for Luc Besson and started helping him develop the concept. It was at this time he met brilliant comic artists Jean Giroux and Jean-Claude Mézières to develop the aesthetic of this film. In particular, Mézières' work on futuristic artwork is what helped him develop the aesthetic that we see for New York City on the final film. And these two, along with Besson and the storyboarding team, created 8,000 concept drawings to nail down this aesthetic at this time. And it really seemed like the project had some momentum. It seemed like we could have had this film in 93, 94, around that time. But the production disbanded in 1992.
Oof, big oof. So what happened?
Well, what happened is, as so often is the case with big budget films, there just wasn't a bankroll on this film. Is that Luc Besson wanted to do this for $100 million, but there weren't a lot of people that were willing to give him that script. At this time, the only thing that he had in the can as a director was La Femme Nikita, which was itself a real cult classic in the scene of French action films. And it started out, it's fair to say, his penchant early for casting very strong female characters in action scenes, but there just wasn't that track record for him. He wanted to get a big name onto it, as well as he had considered Bruce Willis and Mel Gibson early for the role of Corbin Dallas, but it just wasn't falling into place, and they had to set it aside.
Wow. Oh, that's so frustrating, but I get it. So you got this guy, he's got this 400-page script, he's got some 8,000 concept drawings, he's like, let's do the thing, and they're like, you ain't got much experience, though, under your belt. I don't know if we could trust you. So how do you go from completely shutting down? Like, does he, like, table this, do something else? Like, how does that process go for this to be able to come back and to be what we see today?
You're right to bring up, it is, from the studio perspective, it sucks as a creative to see, somebody not get a concept like this greenlit immediately. Like, you'd love in a perfect world for all good art to have money thrown at it. But yeah, you just do have to table a project like this. You have to set it aside. And it's tragic because it means the disbanding of a creative team. Like, Jean Giroux had to opt out of the production because of this. He was lucky in that he did keep a couple of his designers around him, and design becomes a critical part of this film. But Besson just did not have the option to do Fifth Element. So what he did in response is he got his first studio-driven project, and boy, oh boy, BK, did he knock it out of the park. With 1994's The Professional, starring Jean Reno, Gary Oldman, and a very young Natalie Portman.
Oh, my.
Luc Besson. Yeah, I don't know if you know this film, BK, but it's a great, great watch. This film kind of caught the world by storm in a good year for film. 94 is widely recognized as one of the strongest years of modern film, and this is a big part of it. It was a very insular story about an assassin who takes care of a young girl who's lost her family, and it hit that pulse for people. People went to go see it. People talked about it in the way that word of mouth still used to spread around film in their popularity the way they did. And so with that clout he developed from The Professional, that let him get Fifth Element back into gear, but at a cost, because he did decide that he was going to have to do this at 90 million, keep it under those 9 digits to get the budget. And in what could have been a tragic circumstance, he was considering doing this without a big name, as he was going to bail out on having Bruce Willis star.
Whoa, wait. Oh, right, because that's as originally intended, was like, these are the people I'd like to see in this. And it was like, you know what? We'll scrap having a big name for the lead like that. That's a big decision to say.
And the sad part, too, is that Bruce Willis at the time, he was coming off a good number of critical flops for his performances. He had just done Hudson Hawk, which was a widely reviled film. He had just done Last Man Standing, which I love Bruce Willis, but that film bores me to tears. And so he kind of, he was a big name actor still, because Die Hard was still going to, pay the rent. We can't forget John McClane.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he was desperate to find something to do, and it was a risk to helm a film with him. But what ended up happening is that Luc Besson was coming away from Willis in the mid-90s when they went into the casting process, and he just happened to end up on a call with him. He was in an agent's office when Willis called about an unrelated film, and Besson just asked to speak with him. And at this point on this phone call, Besson broke it to Willis, like, listen, we have to do the film for 90 instead of 100 million. I don't think, I can pay your fee. I would love to have you involved, but I just don't think I can make it work. And Willis, in a true moment of generosity, responded, if I like a film, we can always make a deal. And Bruce Willis really did love this script. It was a triumph of writing. It was the investment Besson had in this concept he had for 20 years that got Willis on the project.
Wow, that's awesome. That's like a story you love to hear, though, where it's like, as like an artist like myself or a creative, you're like, wow, someone is invested in seeing that final product where they're like, okay, you know what, bro, like, just swing me what you can, like, we'll make this work.
It's a beautiful thing to see. All credit to Bruce Willis. Is a lot of actors will defer their rates when they find a good script. But with something this high concept, it is a risk. And it is a risk when you've come off of some work that was panned critically. So Willis going to bat for this film speaks volumes to me about him. But I will say it was an easier process for him to wind up with Willis on the film than Mila Jovovich, our queen in this film, BK. Is she went through a process of being one of 200, 300 applicants for this role. And it ended up being personal conversations between Besson and Jovovich that got her into this film.
Wow. Okay, see, I was going to ask that because, one, we can talk about Lilu and the performance of Mila as that character and how amazing it is, which is a sign to me that there was a bit of a behind the scenes as to why that character is just executed so well. So I need to know the tea. Like they just hooked up. They were like, hey, look, like, this is the thing. You get the vision. Like, we want you on. So that's 200 to 300 applicants. To me, that sounds like a very large pool for such a leading role.
It's a big pool, but Besson wanted to make sure that he got the right person. It wasn't so much auditions for the role of Lilu, so much as it was just conversations with these different actresses. And Mila Jovovich really impressed him in the way that she wanted to invest in the script, in the way that she wanted to develop things for the character. And in particular, she would develop the divine language spoken with Lilu with Luc Besson. They would, on set and during pre-production, exchange letters in the divine language. They would speak to each other in the divine languages. They came up with a real way of making this something real that was a part of her character. And that investment is what wins over the day. And, a part of me wonders as well, because Mila Jovovich, this is the film that kind of cemented her as being a really strong feminine lead. Now, obviously, with things like the Resident Evil series since then, she's cemented that place for herself within Hollywood. But this was sort of the birth of her becoming kind of the next Sigourney Weaver in this film. This is really where she built her chops.
But totally, and you can really tell, like, again, if you got to take a look at and rewatch it again. I can't gush about it enough, but really her investment and really just like she was the character. Like, it's weird because a lot of times, sometimes you can see actors and it's like, oh, they're playing themselves, or you can really just kind of see through the character. In this specific character as Lilu, I couldn't see through anything. I was very invested, and I'm gushing. I'm sorry, I can't.
hey, gush away. We love the performance here on the Revenge of the Film Nerds for a reason. You know, it's great to see that investment too from another perspective. Luc Besson, you notice throughout the film, he likes his comedy in this world. Like, Fifth Element is not meant to be the, world's most super serious film. There are high stakes. There is a universe that can be destroyed in this film. But it does have this level of kitsch that is very authentic. And I think the way that the actors like Willis and Jovovich bought into it really makes a difference. Is Besson even went on record saying with this film, he was kind of sick of dark, gritty sci-fi at the time. He wanted to do something that he referred to as cheerfully crazy. And I think he does succeed in that here, because it is such a design-specific film. It's such a niche film in the way it's designed in its spectacle. And yet it does end up being something very cheerful at the end of the day, despite the stakes.
No, I think that is the perfect way to describe this film. Cheerfully crazy. Like, let's actually get into it. At the start of the film, you can feel that tone. You're in this flashback setup where they're like, here's some world building, and like you have this priest guy who's trying to poison the archaeologist in a very comedic way, and then all of a sudden, creatures, face being god creatures, just show up, but it's not. That's not what's comical. Is the situation that's unfolding is a little bit comical, but the stakes of the sci-fi-ness, right? These aliens are very realistic. They're very invested in what is happening. Some sort of like predetermined meetup or arrangement, some sort of prophecy was supposed to happen, and that reality of that is very strong. And then you see these characters who are very lighthearted in despite of something crazy happening, and you have the aliens kind of look awkward and they waddle, but they are cohesive. It's very interesting that you say that, like, cheerfully crazy. Like, things are very kind of all over the place, but in a connected way. And it really starts from, I think, the very beginning of the film.
I agree with you on that. And I think it's a funny little odd scene here, because if you think about it, they could just begin without that conceptualization there. But it's not only a very funny scene where, the kid who's supposed to be giving the archaeologist light keeps falling asleep and getting yelled at. And, the great comedic timing with tossing out the poisoned water to replace it with wine. Those little touches do set you up that this is a film that you're supposed to sit back and enjoy. You're supposed to revel in those comedic moments. And it doesn't stop being comedic. You're right. When the Mondashewans, the aliens, show up, they're these big, bulky, gold-plated they look a little bit like the Volus in Mass Effect, to be honest. They're very silly, unwieldy creatures, but their purpose is very serious. They, make it clear, time not important, only life important. In taking the stones and the fifth element away from Earth because they can't be trusted in the hands of humans, they are dead serious in what they're doing. But it's done through this very stylistic way that allows you to stay lighthearted but engaged. It's a smart way of opening the film with this little, could be considered a throwaway scene if you're not looking at it closely enough. But when you look at it, you see that it sets the whole mood of the film while also giving you just the barest glimpse of what the stakes really are.
Yeah, if people who don't like this film, I think they must have blinked during that scene, because I feel like people who don't like this say they don't get it, right? Or like maybe they don't understand. Like I'm like, dude, just watch it from the beginning. Like actually watch it from the beginning. The cookies are there, the crumbs are there. You know what I'm saying? Like they paint that world from start to finish, and the comedicness like is just seen so throughout the film that it really shows that that is a tone that the film is taking, and not just a device. It's something that is integral to conveying the story that I think Besson wants us to view.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we'll get into with a couple of later scenes, comedic timing actually becomes a means of building high moments in action. And that's, I think, one of the most brilliant successes of the film. But it's important to get this scene at the beginning up top as well, because when you flash forward to 300 years later, when the dark planet, the manifestation in our universe of darkness, shows up, the conflict is very different. You see the president here, our man Zeus, Tony Lister, a.k.a. Debo, for those of you who love Friday.
Debo.
Our president here, he is concerned with, preserving good by using militaristic might. And meanwhile, he is being talked to by Ian Holmes' priest Cornelius, who is trying to tell him about the fifth element, trying to tell him about the weapon for good. So we go from the life-death struggle of just, the preservation of all that exists in the beginning to the very insular and human struggle of, peace versus war. It's a way of bringing in the humanism of the film after you've built the stakes, and of starting to introduce us to these very interesting series of characters that make up a very ensemble cast.
I agree with you saying that. The cast setup, I was just about to kind of like go off on that, because it definitely structures that sort of hierarchy for the social status of the world that is created in the fifth element. So with the military presence, you can see that the president is literally the captain and the command in charge. Like he's in a fleet, is positioned properly, but he's somewhere who's on the front lines, right? It's a different kind of world that we're seeing already off top of humans. Priests and spiritual leaders are on ship consulting military peoples about what to do with this cosmic being of destruction that appears. And you kind of get a good sense of how eclectic this world is, how progressive this world is. I mean, not to mention, let's call a spade a spade. The president is Black. At the time, this is unheard of. What year did this come out again, guys? This is what? 97?
And it's something you can take for granted when you're watching this, but there really is a great diversity to the cast. In this military scene, you're not just seeing white faces as the vestiges of authority. You're seeing Black people and Asian people and Hispanics and Indian people. You're seeing this great all-inclusive future that Besson has dared to imagine. He has gone against a lot of the standards of sci-fi in a very subtle way. It started with Star Trek being very, progressive back in the day by just having, Black and Asian crew members. And it's in that spirit that this feels as though it was cast. And it's a wonderful thing to see. And it's something I think that has aged very well about the film.
Oh, totally. Honestly, it was very refreshing, to be frank. If you've ever gone back and watched the Star Wars films, being older, it is disappointing as a person of color to see the lack of just even extras that are people that look like you. And with the fifth element, it's even the side roles are people of color or BIPOCs. So many just sprinkled in there where it feels organic. It feels not characterized. It feels not stereotypical. It feels like they really created a world that was multicultural.
I think it's a good way to put it. And I think it's interesting the way that the focus is in this first hour on the people of this world, on the ways in which this progressive world is constructed. We like to discuss films here on Revenge of the Film Nerds in sequence. But with The Fifth Element, it's interesting, is the first hour of the film is really great character development. So in discussing these scenes, it almost behooves us to discuss our characters first and foremost. And boy, oh boy, it starts with our protagonist, our man Corbin Dallas, he's an extremely interesting character to me from the word go. You're used to seeing Bruce Willis as this very capable action hero, but at the start of this film, he is kind of this very down and out guy. He sort of is just, transient in his own life. He seems like he's completely unmotivated. And he indicates early on that he's unmotivated because he lives a life that is bereft of love at the moment. He is a warrior searching for love, BK, quite literally.
You know, I felt so sad for him because, like, they really do paint him as this, like, down and out New Yorker, you know, coupled with the annoying ass mom who won't stop calling him throughout the entire damn movie. Can't get away from his goddamn mother. It's just very great. Like, they make this character about him. Like, even when he's, you know, the hero, he still has this very human aspect about him amidst the world of aliens and like divinity, right? I feel like Corbin is like the one character that really grounds you throughout the film, even though you're not really following the story through his lens. He is a good character that kind of gives you that perspective of someone who is not invested and being forced to be invested. I think that's what's super unique about Corbin's perspective in this story.
And you do see that he's a capable, active character, though. You do see that little small vignette there with the guy who tries to mug him, who he quickly gets his, clearly taken several guns off this guy and takes yet another one. You see that Corbin is a capable guy. He's just meandering. He just has no sense of purpose. And you compare that to the reconstruction of the Fifth Element of Lilu in this lab, I guess in Midtown Manhattan. You see her immediately as a capable and purposeful being. She is, as they keep describing, perfect. And it's cool to see that because you set up the two principal characters in this film almost as foils of each other, even though their aims are completely foreign to one another. Their existence is not interlinked at this point in any way, shape, or form. But where you see Corbin Dallas sort of flitting about through life, Mila Jovovich, she's up, she's on it. She needs to escape. She needs to find Priest Cornelius. She needs to, meet her destiny as the Fifth Element. And I thought that was a really interesting way of setting them apart early on.
No, I'm glad that you pointed that out because it is very important. Like, typically you don't see that type of foil between a male and female character in such leading roles, let alone in like an action sci-fi thing. So, for me to see Lilu be this character who is, like you said, the perfect being, who is someone who is filled with purpose, and like you said, her destiny, she's charged to complete her destiny. She's filled with wonder. She's filled with hope. Like, I feel like Corbin is hopeless. Like, he has no faith in anything. And Lilu is like all of the opposites, which is really neat because the setup there for then, okay, how are these two going to interact when they meet is like so dope because you're waiting, like, are they going to clash? Is there some secret synergy? Like, how long is this going to last? Like, because the way the movie plays out, that's the love interest. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's one of those films. There's no one else in the running, okay? Like,
it's really interesting because there's a lot to be said about whether or not this is an action adventure or a romance. Bruce Willis in this film, Corbin Dallas, is waiting for the perfect love to fall into his lap, and instead she literally comes crashing through the roof of his cab.
Which, by the way, is so funny because I didn't expect it to happen in that moment. Like, I thought the beat was going to happen a little bit later. Sure enough, you're like free falling off the building that's the skyscraper, floating skyscraper, right into the roof of the cab car. And you're like, okay, so this is how they meet. Okay, not walking into a bar, not getting caught with the wrong people. No, just literally coincidental, almost fate, destiny. I don't know.
The other thing that's interesting about the scene too is it gets back to your point about her having hope versus Corbin being very hopeless. She has been taken care of for the last 300 years by the Mondoshiwans, the aliens we saw in the beginning. And while their ship is attacked and destroyed by the Mangalores, a group of kind of pig-headed aliens who are just violent warriors, she is still very hopeful because she has been raised by this kind of innocent alien race, these kind of very moralistic beings. And so she really is approaching things with at innocence. And you see that innocence in this scene as well. While Corbin is worried about, having the points taken off his license, losing his cab, quite literally the only thing that's keeping him moored to an existence, Lilu is just very silently pleading with him, in her, broken, very small understanding of English at this point, please help. All she sees is herself under threat, and she wants a person to be able to take care of her. And it sort of sets up that dynamic for Corbin, is that over the course of this film, he's going to not just develop an abiding affection for Lilu, he's going to have to find a way to develop a means of taking care of her, because even though she's a perfect being, she can't go through her journey alone.
I'm actually glad that you said that. I believe like quite a few characters also remind Corbin that Lilu needs help. Like, she's more fragile than she seems. She's going to need assistance through this journey. And they kind of set that up from the beginning with the idea of the priest. I believe the priest was originally intended to be that guide, that helper. And the side story for me is that Corbin is technically supposed to be the next apprentice, and that poor little kid is, and he's not supposed to be. If you get what I'm saying, Jack?
Yeah.
Like, you have Cornelius and then his like little assistant guy. I think that's just a throwaway. It's really supposed to be Corbin. He was always supposed to be the one, and Cornelius failed at finding him.
David is his heart's in the right place as a character, working with Vito Cornelius to preserve this order, to be the caretakers of this knowledge on Earth. But he is very feckless, and he is very doddering as a character. But before we get into the Cornelius and his buddy David a little bit, I do want to focus in on the chase scene that results from Lilu falling into Corbin's cab, because it is a great opportunity for us to talk about the effects on this film. Now, BK, you and I were watching this, and we realized, for the 90s, this is pretty refined CGI. I wonder how they got it to map like this. It turns out it's because they were smart enough at this time to do not only CGI and practical effects in computer, but they did that not with green screen, but in tandem with modeling and with very strong practical effects work. In fact, most of the futuristic New York City that you're seeing in this film is a model.
That's why it was so good. I was like, this holds up. And that's how anything with like modeling in it, it will hold up. CGI, like, I'm not with it. I'm with more of the practical effects here. We all know that. We gush over it. So to see that and the chase scene and having everyone involved in that and its execution being such a high caliber, I was like, okay, so there's got to be another element. And you called that when we were watching it.
Yeah, it was something that just really stuck out because of how organic it looks. Like, I hate to keep bringing up Independence Day because I think it's a fun film, but if you go back and look at the CGI of the fight sequences between the F-18s and the alien spacecrafts, it is dated as all get out in this time. And Fifth Element just does not come across dated in the same way. The animation still feels fresh. The modeling still feels fresh. And FYI, I just want to personally thank the practical effects team on Fifth Element for the tedium they went through. They said that the hardest parts of this was doing stuff like building light posts, building windows for these little models, like the very like fine details that you can't scrimp on if you're going to do modeling for your production. And it just all comes together brilliantly is when you see the cab, busting through the floating traffic, which is done through particle effects and done through mathematics. When you see the way in which different elements within the model lend themselves to the chase, it is just it's the first high moment of action you really have in this kind of lighthearted vein that the film wants to preserve. The chase starts off with Bruce Willis's license running out. You have 0 points left on your license, only to have him destroy his cab fare computer. Just like little moments to build up character are so strong here. And so when we get to this first high moment of action with our two principal characters, we feel like we've built into them enough to earn this moment from both of them.
Totally. And it's the first like moment where like Corbin really acts and makes a decision on something. He's definitely like, all right, cool, we're gonna save this girl, I guess. We're in it. And I think he knew when he made that decision, like, this is it. It's kind of an all or nothing situation. Like, he might not be able to get out of this one. His practical Clark Kent life is going to be ruined because of what's happened now. I mean, how will he be a cab driver anymore when he has no points on his license?
Yep, he once again, he just can't seem to catch a break here. But he's outmatched by the world at this point. He doesn't kind of get what he's dealing with. You see that even when he brings Lilu to Cornelius's place. And Cornelius, by the way, played to perfection by Ian Holm, who is just he's got his hands in so much sci-fi. And rest in peace, Ian Holm. We lost him this year, but this is one of my favorite performances of his because of the way he plays Cornelius. He is very dedicated, but to the knowledge he has. But just like Bruce Willis in this film, he is outmatched by the task at hand. The only difference is that he happens to know what the task at hand actually is. And so when he rushes Bruce Willis out of the apartment quickly, he is trying to, take control of this, trying to, follow the scriptures to save the world. But he doesn't necessarily seem like he's got the best grip on things.
No, he doesn't know how to finesse. And that's what our boy Bruce Willis is good at. He's good at finessing situations. As we see, as he successfully escapes the cops, even after they chase him really far, is able to evade them. So I can see there where this is obviously going to be a collaborative effort amongst all of them to really get this done, because everyone is kind of fairly innocent in that group there, of the priests, of Lilu, of even Corbin. All of them have this kind of air of innocence and naivety of what is really about to happen. Even Cornelius, who knows what's about to happen, is still very naive. I've never practically done anything like this before. I mean, of course, why would you? This is the end of the world, right? This only comes once a millennia. This doesn't come every day. So to see all of them kind of branch out into the types of characters they are, and then really we get to the turning point of the film, which is okay, well, here's the mission. Let's accomplish the mission. And now we have not one party involved, but there's 3 to 4 other parties involved in said single mission. Am I correct in saying that?
Not only that, but during these moments leading up to it, we are also introduced to our principal human antagonist in Zorg, played by Gary Oldman. Now, whereas, this is all about righteousness and saving and preserving life for Cornelius and for Lilu, and even though he doesn't know it yet, it will become the motivation for Corbin Dallas, along with his love for Lilu. Zorg is motivated by corporate greed. He wants to bring about the annihilation of everything because he sees a quick buck in it. It's absurdity. He doesn't even consider the fact that he is going to be annihilated as well. He just wants to get rich as this typical greedy tycoon. And it's a tough role to pull off, being that kind of comic villain. But Gary Oldman does it well, despite the fact, BK, he is not a fan of this film.
Really? So he himself doesn't enjoy this film? Is it one of those films he looks back on, he's like, man, the 90s, they were rough, man. I don't talk about it.
I don't think it's so much that. It's just a difference in, I think, aim. Gary Oldman had worked with Luc Besson on The Professional in 1994, and that had been a very positive experience for him. He felt like Fifth Element was a little different because while Bruce Willis and Mila Jovovich have spoken very positively about their experiences, Gary Oldman always felt a bit of regret, like he was, as he said, begging for his own supper. At the time, he was trying to get a budget for his directorial and writing debut for a small film called Nil by Mouth that he did. And it's something that everybody in Hollywood does to certain degrees. Like Steven Soderbergh, in particular, was a director who kind of popularized this model of the so-called doing one for us and doing one for them. This mentality that if you're going to make the creative work that you want to make, you have to kowtow to what Hollywood needs from you as a celebrity, as an actor. And so Oldman has always kind of felt, it seems, from interviews he's done, that he was trying to do this as the one for them so he could do the one for us. But despite the fact that Zorg is played by somebody who was kind of an unwilling participant here, I think Gary Oldman does succeed in his drive. He doesn't come across as a cheesy villain to me. He has very clear motivations, but again, it fits in with this theme of these humans who are surrounding this celestial power being outmatched, is he's consistently throughout the movie trying to get his hands on the elemental stones that help power the weapon of good that the fifth element is the centerpiece of. And time again, he is foiled in getting these stones. He tries to work with the Mangalores and, get them. He tries to work by himself and get them. And he continues to fail. And I think that's one of the real good hallmarks of a good villain in a comedy, is you don't want them to be, you want them to obviously make overages in the script to being evil. You see that when he tricks the Mangalores and blows them all up with the button on one of his guns he's selling them. You see with his disdain for Cornelius's view of life when they talk in his office. You see these things about him that are villainish, but he is a Snidely Whiplash kind of character. He is somebody you expect to be foiled. And I think that's part of what makes his role so fun for me.
I do enjoy the role too. It's very like comic booky or cartoony in the nice way of saying it, because those can be negative terms. I'm saying them more positive. Like, you ever see Phineas and Ferb Doofenshmirtz? I got hella Doofenshmirtz vibes from Zorg. Like, you know what I mean? He's like doing all these complicated but very accurately or intelligently prepared schemes, but always just falling short and getting like, the underhand of the situation. And I feel like that's very much Zorg in this. Like, when he tries to do things that would be very smart, which is what a good DC villain we might see doesn't ever work out, even the attitude. So, and now that I know the backstory between the actor and the situation, low key, I think the reason why his performance is so good is that disdain for being a part of it. Because he's just so aggy the whole time. I think it sells it. I think he really sells the character of just being aggravated with everyone just not being good enough. I low-key think that's him projecting his opinion about the movie and being involved in it against his will.
It's quite possible, It's a fun theory. It's a fun theory for this. And, it is linked into by a couple of things that happened on set. Like, in particular, Gary Oldman was reportedly driven wild by Tricky from Massive Attack, who played Right Hand in the film, the black gentleman who is his assistant. Apparently Tricky is just, a silly, kind of fun, kind of weird guy, and it would throw off Gary Oldman while he would be doing takes. So some of that irritation, that fed up nature you see, really is him organically coming through that part. And I know Gary Oldman, he may not like this film, but I think there is a real space to appreciate his performance in there as one of these four, real principal characters. But as we, get into it, we finally have had this beautiful development of sort of who are going to be our principal players moving forward. We've met the president, we've met the priests, we've met our protagonist, we've met, our female lead, and we've met our human villain in this. And it's now just a matter of bringing them all together. So when you mention the mission coming together, it starts off with the rigging of a contest to get Corbin Dallas to a resort called Floston Paradise. This is where he is supposed to meet the person who is taking care of the stones. But it all starts off with this hilarious little scene in Corbin's apartment.
Oh man, that scene is so funny because like the military guys, his boy is like, I got the right man for the job, and shows up. But the scene starts before that, right? It's when he's eating like ramen on this like boat ramen thing that pulls up to your window, which again, just another little tidbit of like the world building of this world is just so juicy.
You want that boat. I know you want that boat.
I need it. Oh, best moment, low-key best moment in the film. Okay, just saying. But he's there. He's like, oh, this whole like talk about bad luck. Is it good luck? It can't rain all the time type of thing. Like, check the mail. Maybe it's good news. And it's, he gets fired from his job. And then he's like, okay, well, maybe the next thing that happens is going to be even more bad news. We've seen him get bad news after bad news after bad news. And sure enough, his old buddy shows up and is like, yo, you're a part of this mission. Also getting a call from his mom, like simultaneously being like, you've won this concert and you're not taking me. How dare you? All of this like happening in like succession of like confusion, which I feel like I felt like the Corbin in that moment of like, what was good? What was bad about this situation? Is this a positive or is this even a negative? As things just start to like decelerate and turn into shambles.
It's so good because these set pieces keep coming together. It reminds me of the foundations of comedy on film. Is, you see this scene where the military guys show up and like, yeah, no, we rigged the contest for you, so we're going to give you this mission, and this private is going to be your wife. And then Vito Cornelius and Lilu show up, and suddenly he's like, oh, I need to hide you. This is my wife. She doesn't know that I'm involved with the military, lying to them to get them dealt with, and throws them in his refrigerator to hide them. And then they show up, and Vito Cornelius is threatening him with a gun and wants the tickets. But then the police, which are actually Mangalores in disguise, show up trying to capture Corbin Dallas on some trumped up charges Zord put up. And so he has to hide Cornelius and Lilu at this point. And it's a lot like, Buster Keaton's The General. It's a lot like the Marx Brothers work on Duck Soup. Just this really intelligent set piece that keeps building and building and building and giving you more circumstances and more beats to laugh at and more potential for humor. And so I think it's a really interesting exercise in how, in an action film, a scene based purely off of comedic timing, not off of fight scenes, not off of, a star battle or anything like that, just a scene of comedy becomes a high moment within the action. It gives you that punch you need to be like, okay, first act is over. We are thoroughly in the second act. We are taking on this mission. We are going to go to Floston Paradise, and we're going to save the world. But you do it through comedy. I just think it's a brilliant moment, BK.
No, you're right. That is exactly what it is. It moves it to the next scene. All the pieces are in play at that moment, and you get to see all of them. Like a lot of the time, you have films that kind of try to do something like this, but all the parties are separate. It's really one of those times where like everyone comes together, and like the results could be catastrophic every time. You never know, because the stakes and the ridiculousness and the comedy just gets amped up every time all of these parties are involved. So when we go from there then, which doesn't stop the funnies, to the airport scene, Jack, let me tell you, I'm in my seat dying because this whole scene is ridiculous. For one, how many people can come up and claim they're the same guy without actually raising some red flags within the first 2 attempts?
I am Spartacus. Oh, but
right.
I love the airport scene too, because it's very earned. We don't just have these great moments of comedy that leads you to this great little centerpiece scene in the film. You also have that rising tension between Corbin and Lilu as they have, been sort of circling around each other, sort of becoming more and more tense. And you finally see them kind of become a team here when Corbin does finally check in with her. But the airport is such a frantic comedic set piece, because not only are you introduced to all these parties trying to, complete the quest, trying to pull one over on the authorities so that they can be the ones to get to the stones first, but you also meet probably the film's most polarizing character. This is where we meet our boy Ruby Rhod, played by Chris Tucker.
Ruby Rhod! Yes, queen. Oh my gosh, I can't. Sorry, I'm geeking. Polarizing, I don't care. Best character in this goddamn movie, all right? I said what I said.
Yeah, you fell in love quick with Ruby Rhod.
Oh my god, it's the mustache. I can't. Oh man, just everything about it. Like Ruby is such a great character. Like the very first ever influencer live streamer is Ruby Rhod. Okay.
Oh man.
Totally. Like from the fit on point, down to the intro, down to the literally just strutting, owning the room. Like who's in charge. And although it does have that kind of very pompous air to it, there is also something that's not too rude or crass about Ruby, but something very genuine. Like you see Ruby as an artist just expressing themselves in whatever form pops into their head. Right? If it's green, it's green. Okay.
Yeah, it's super green.
And I love Ruby. I love Ruby so much. And I think my question to you is, where does Ruby really become an integral character in this transition? Now, is it during the airport scene, or is it after?
It's hard to say, because I think he's important for a couple of things. For one, he's kind of a statement of this film's gender identity put into character form. And it's one of these things that you see through his costume design. Now, this obviously, we've talked about it. It was an extremely highly stylized film, and a lot of that is the costume work done by Jean-Paul Gaultier. Yes, that Jean-Paul Gaultier. He literally created about 900 different costumes for people on this film, and he designed them to be what he called intellectually transgressive. He wanted the aesthetics of this film to challenge gender and sexuality norms as just part of that vision of a progressive future. So when Ruby Rhod shows up in, the low-cut dress number, when he first comes up to interview Corbin when they're on the ship, when he, has that, beautiful kind of rose-styled hairdo in the opera house. It's done deliberately so that he can be that kind of expressive character for the film's transgressive nature. And I think that's a really important thing to look at him at. But also, I think he's a good reference for the average person, which seems weird to say because he is this gigantic celebrity. Like, they literally say his radio show goes out to like 50 billion people or something like that. He is kind of your grounding because he thinks he is in power, he thinks he's in command, but the world he commands is very small and insular compared to the one that Corbin is now exposed to, and the one that Lilu, Cornelius, and Zorg have also kind of always known is up for grabs. It's a real way for you as a viewer, I think, to personalize yourself, but it's hard to do for some people because they just found this character to be so horrifying to them. Like, would you believe people will rank Ruby Rhod up with Jar Jar Binks as characters they think, quote unquote, ruin films?
What? You guys need to see my face. I am shook. Tears are forming right now. The fact that was in the same sentence, I'm offended. I'm emotionally and personally offended. Oh, they don't see what it means. Oh, they are poor baby. I'm sorry this character was too progressive for you.
You went straight from angry to patronizing.
What can I say? Look, my love for Ruby is great, and I think what you said is exactly why. Is in this moment where Ruby becomes one of the main characters that becomes a viewing device almost. Our other character, Corbin Dallas, our main character, really when the mission starts kind of turns more into that military guy. He has more of a role now. He has more of a place. He's no longer kind of down and out. Like, he's in his element. He's finessing. He's actually doing a lot of positive things. So I think as the viewer, it kind of becomes harder and harder to really connect with that character, and seeing Ruby being this fashionista, being someone who's getting roped up into everything, you very much resonate with that character, and you're very much along for the ride. And boy, is Ruby along for the ride, and eventually becomes an active participant in this ride that unfolds throughout the ship paradise scene. I guess that's what I'm calling it now, Jack.
I think, BK, the other thing I really enjoy about Chris Tucker's performance here is that because it's so transgressive and because it's so interesting within the context of the world, you can identify with his character as both a man and a woman, is in embodying this role and the camp that comes along with it and the kitsch that comes along with it. He really becomes somebody that it doesn't matter what your gender is, you're going to find him to be a relatable character at the end of the day.
Totally. I could not agree with you more. And Chris Tucker just owns the shit out of it. Like, absolutely owns, like, is invested. And I think that's really what sends the character home. Like, any less fragment of less investment from an actor would have made that character as bad as a Jar Jar, but it's not. Okay. Hot take.
My favorite review, I cannot remember who wrote this, but my favorite review of his performance in this role is that he was the best special effect of the summer.
Oh my God. I'm dead. I am dead.
But yeah, we've been led into these pieces. Everything is coming together, and we finally see the parties are invested and ready to go at those stones when they get to Floston Paradise in the hotel. Now, it's obviously the most famous set piece from the film, but I think the world building that is done ahead of time is what really makes this all come together. It's what makes you buy the existence of the diva at the word go, despite the fact you haven't seen any aliens that look like her. It's why you buy the kind of violent reaction from the Mangalores in trying to push the situation and take hostages. It's just a really great set piece, and it starts us off with a beautiful, beautiful aria, that great diva performance that everybody knows about.
I'm so excited to hear the deets of this because it is honestly it's top 2 best scenes in the film. Let's be real. And like you said, we have not seen the alien species that looks like the diva at all, or quite frankly, any other of the types of characters that are kind of present when this unfolds. And the world building that Rudy does in one fell swoop, right, of introducing different little groups of people that are popular. You've got like the prime minister, right? You've got some other like artist group. I'm not sure the name, but you've got all these groups of important people all come to see this extraordinarily captivating performance, and it sets the stage for this very global, it's not global, we're in the universe, right? Like this is a planetary convergence of the highest order. Okay, like this is not just the everyman situation, this is like the biggest stakes ever, and for that to be scored by an actual diva, I'm gonna call them, because that performance was fantastic. And I was told there was no like post on the voice. Am I incorrect in that?
It's a common misconception with this film. I hate to burst anybody's bubble on this, but
no, tell me.
This aria, it was sung by a singer live, like a vocalist did do this, but it was not the diva Plava Laguna you saw on the screen.
Okay.
The diva was actually Luc Besson's wife at the time. And actually, quick tangent, this turned out to be kind of a fraught film for her because during the shooting, Luc Besson actually left her for Mila Jovovich.
Jack, you really mean to tell me that happened? Like, actually, that is so bad. My girl, Mila, oh, you done take the man from her. How do you do a performance like that with something so crazy like that happening? You mean to tell me it happened at like the same time, or
it happened in close succession. I mean, this was this performance was a big centerpiece for her and a big showcase for her, even though it was sung by Albanian soprano Inva Mula. She's the vocalist responsible for the recording that you hear. But the diva Plava Laguna's performance is, for the short time she's on screen, really very important, because I think that, it's a tough thing. Yeah, she did lose her husband on this, but she gained the most important scene in the film, I think, because not only is her aria beautiful, it's a statement of the identity of feminine power in the film, because it's juxtaposed with this scene of Lilu beating the absolute tar out of the Mangalores who have come and trying to steal the stones. And this ends up actually motivating the Mangalores to get more desperate and to start shooting up the hotel because they think they just got ambushed. But it is just this push towards violence by the unbridled expression of femininity that is so interesting here. And so, while it definitely happened through some fraught circumstances, and while it's a little awkward for these two women to be sharing that scene, even if Mila Jovovich and Luc Besson would call it quits by 1999, it really is this beautiful mission statement for the whole film.
No, you're totally right to that. It's the moment where everything comes together. All the pieces are really starting to make sense. Like, if they didn't make sense before, you definitely understand what's going on now. Shit's about to go down, okay? And the performance is impeccable. Also, it's remix, right? It starts off very classical, very operatic, and then turns into this very like upbeat kind of contemporary almost hip-hop house type of mix, which is another testament to just how unique this world that has been created. Like, little nuances like that for me are what get me all giddy about this film.
And that's a real triumph of the work of composer Eric Serra. Now, those of you who have been watching films in the 90s, you will know Eric Serra's work probably first and foremost from doing the score for GoldenEye, which is widely considered by a lot of people in our generation to be the best of the Bond films, depending on how you feel about Casino Royale or Dr. No. But Eric Serra lent himself to Luc Besson's style because Besson has always been described, as have his films, as very musical. He's very related to his audio aesthetic in creating works. And if you notice in The Fifth Element, something like 90% of the film has scoring under it. So to solve the sort of quagmire of how to come up with that audio aesthetic, Serra drew from so many different sources. He drew from these classical compositions that existed to get the aria scene, but he was also drawing influences from reggae during the airport scene. He would use these same sort of low drums and low synthscapes that he used on GoldenEye when confronted with the Dark Planet. Is he really did put in a huge amount of work to make this film sound of the future in the way that the design work made this look like this future aesthetic. It's another piece of the puzzle that comes together to create this very brilliant world.
It's so holistic, there's not an element that's missed, right? Like we talked about from the costuming, and how unique it is. Even your comment, it was very French, some of the uniforms, right? Like the military guys are pretty French looking, and I'm like, I can see it, but it's always an interpretation. It's always like something I was least expecting. Like a lot of the crowd shots you see are just so different, so diverse, just there. Like we said, it was very organic, and then to bring that in with the music where it made it just so realistic in a sense, the realism when it becomes this holistic project and down to each detail and all of those elements, it really does create a world that I'm like, I want to be a part in, I want to see, I want to participate. Like, please don't let this end. Like, we started watching it, I was like, God damn it, another 2-hour movie. Why do we keep doing this to ourselves? But I did not once say that while I was watching the film, especially not at the part where we were at. Absolutely not. That part, I was so invested. I was the most invested I was in the whole movie at that part, at the moment where you think you'd lose people. So that goes to show how much I kind of really enjoyed my experience watching this.
It's a really wonderful way that this all comes together to create the true centerpiece action scene of this film in the hotel fight. After the aria subsides, the Mangalores go on the attack. Zorg shows up on the hotel and tries to shoot up Lilu and gets her trapped in a vent. And the stakes are really raised here. And it's made clear after the diva gets shot and after, she reveals to Corbin that she's been carrying the stones inside of her being that they need to be removed. It's also made clear to him that this fight is not just about his military capability. He is here to save Lilu because it's that real moment where you realize she really can't do this on her own. When she's face down with Zorg, she's in dire straits in the vents. She's badly injured by this gunfight. And so not only is he having to be capable to save the world, he's having to save his love while also saving the world. And so you understand where that capability and adrenaline comes from in this scene. And it's beautiful. Just as a start, at the beginning of this, when they are still in the front row of the theater, they've just got the stones out of Viva Plava Laguna. You see how calm he is juxtaposed with Ruby Rhod, who is shook.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Corbin, oh my God. I can't. I'm sorry.
Corbin, my man, they're coming. They're coming. Oh, shit. 3 of them coming, Corbin.
It's true because you are frantic. Like Chris Tucker's performance there really just gives you this like franticness, and it really does show the juxtaposition between Corbin, who is just like, I am getting shit done right now. Like, we are diehard in this bitch. Like, let's go. Like, pull up. You get some. Wait 5 seconds. Okay, you get some.
And I love, too, that even in this great action sequence, they don't abandon the comedy of it. You have Ruby Rhod is still broadcasting his radio show while all this is going on. The deaf laser ball player, I think it is, who is, surrounded by groupies. He, can't hear Bruce Willis. And when he, instead of tossing him a gun, tosses him pool balls like he thinks he's helping. These good subtle moments that it's like the way almost that Indiana Jones fought in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Corbin Dallas here is outmatched by bigger firepower and a much larger force in the Mangalores, who are just absolutely cutting apart this hotel lobby. And yet, through turning the situation on its, head, through finding little ways to use the environment to his advantage, finding ways to even get Ruby Rhod involved in helping him, even though he is, absolutely cracked. The man is so shook that he literally hears a slightest sound and accidentally, pulls the trigger on a gun he's using to hold a guy captive. there are these little moments that give you that capability of Corbin Dallas that you just wouldn't get if the comedy was removed from the situation.
Totally. We love our high finesse heroes here, like always being able to turn a situation into their favor. That's like my new favorite secret superpower, guys. I want to have high finesse, okay?
It's a great way of putting it. I like that. Hashtag high finesse.
Here we go. And like from that scene there, though, with all those little comedy bits and everything being very lighthearted, though, it does start to get a little bit, I would say, darker because of the franticness of the situation, right? Now we've got there's a bomb from Zorg that's going to blow up, right? There's also another bomb at some point. And then everyone's trying to escape because they're also just floating in space. Like they're on a spaceship. I need to mention that. They aren't on a planet, right? Everyone needs to evacuate and get on these escape pods. The realism, like you said, Lilu is dying and out. Like, let's assume she needs to be rezzed. She's bleeding, and we still need her for the fourth act. Like, she is the only one who can complete this whole other threat. Not the spaceship exploding. That's not the threat. It's still the giant planet of darkness pillowing towards impermanent doom. Okay, so I can't even understand how, first of all, anyone is calm. So that's why I am like Ruby in this, because I was frantic. I'm like, does anyone forget about the planet, though? There is a darkness planet approaching society right now as we know it.
It does get a little bit darker, and it's kind of, in a weird way, it's very motivated, I think, by the central romance in this film. Is throughout, in the moments we've seen Corbin and Lilu come together, it has gone from lighthearted to more tense. So when Lilu is injured here, it makes sense that the film takes a darker tone. And it gets back to my point about, is this an action venture or a romance? Because all of the action scenes are very lighthearted and fun, even though they have a very specific point at the end of the space opera. But the romance is heavy. Like, the romance is deep here. You start to understand as Corbin goes through this that the romance is kind of the point for him. As I mentioned, he is a warrior who at the beginning of this film was unmotivated by love. And when he has that motivation for love, boy, oh boy, does he come through.
Oh yeah, now he's like hyper intelligent. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but like things need to get done then. Like if you thought things needed to get done before, well, throw that out of the water. Now Lilu is on the deathbed. Now we've got to accept that we love her in order to be able to figure out inside what we need to do next, which is mad corny. I did say it's very corny, but it's cute. It's cute. If we are looking at it as a comedy, this is probably my favorite rom-com.
It's an interesting way of putting it. As I didn't necessarily conceptualize it as a rom-com, but it is a romance, it is a comedy, and it is action. It's closer to stuff that would come out in the 80s, like Romancing the Stone, than anything else in a lot of ways. It's this high-concept action that has a very integral romance into its creation. I think, to me, one of the things that really succeeds here, too, is that as the film started with a broad focus, it moves towards its climax back into that broad focus. I mean, firstly, we see the culmination of Lilu's innocence kind of being challenged, because throughout this film, she has been gradually learning more about humanity, gradually learning more about our languages and about our history. And right before they get to the temple, she is finally given cause to learn about the concept of war. And it is absolutely shattering to her innocence. And it brings into question whether or not she's going to help our heroes actually succeed at the end. As she is unsure as to whether or not life is worth preserving, because she sees, as she says, what you do with life when you're given it.
Yeah, it is really important that you pointed that out, because there isn't even a moment where Lilu's like, why would I even follow through this? The person whose sole existence and like was created to accomplish this task, honestly, low key, I think is the first sense of Lilu's agency. I'm going to say it. And I think it's in a nice way that I'm saying it, is that she finally is going against whatever programming she might have had and really trying to understand, how she feels about the situation, even if it is some coming from despair. She sees it and is like, okay, well, maybe I don't do this. What's the point of saving life if this is all that you do with it? And that did stick with me, hearing that from Lilu.
And talking about agency is a really interesting thing here. Is I almost like to phrase it with her character as capability, because she's extraordinarily capable throughout this film.
Yes.
From the start, when she's resurrected, Lilu is, punching through the glass to get at the general who's trying to irritate her and keep her captive. She is moving through this journey of hers with a real sense of purpose, but it's a different kind of capability when she gains knowledge. She goes from being capable of completing her mission to being capable of understanding the complexities of life, and that's a shattering shift for her. It's her realizing almost that the agency she's had before this in the film was not a lie, but certainly delusory in a lot of aspects.
Yeah, you articulated better for me, but you get what I was saying, right? Like, it's very like they wait till the very end to kind of truly develop Lilu. I think there's an illusion that you get insight to her character just because she's learning to communicate. And really, it isn't until after she fully learns to communicate and what we see learning the concept of war, I guess, and what is violence and darkness, she's able to have her character development there in that last act.
And as they are getting ready to, meet their demise, this dark planet is hurtling right towards the Earth. Everyone is set to die. They've managed to overcome this comedic obstacle of opening up the stones, water for water, fire for fire, air for air. But all of that little subtle comedy there at the very end gives way to this very tense moment. Corbin Dallas has to decide here whether or not he truly loves Lilu, and it is only through expressing that love to her that he's going to be able to get her to go along, that he's going to show her that life is worth preserving. And at the end of the day, yeah, it is a little bit cheesy. It is a little bit stereotypical Hollywood. But at the end of the day, love really does conquer all here. In telling her that he loves her, Corbin has her activate and save humanity with the weapon for good.
I'll still go to the gravestone. It's a little corny, but I think the abstract concept there, though, is really dope. Like, when you think about the elements and the fifth element, and what is the fifth element? We aren't really told. We're told it's a perfect being, but what does that mean, right? And at that moment, we get to the idea of maybe the fifth element is love, is a concept. And I think it's even more than that, right? It's love, it's life, it's spirit, it's energy, which are like also found in actual works talking about some sort of fifth element, a lot of in like Eastern works where they do talk about this sort of spirit. There's all the, normal elements, but there is a fifth one, a spirit or something. So the interpretation of what that spirit is, of being love and life and some sort of additional energy, is very, very interesting. I do think that it kind of all comes together there at the end there when he does expresses her love for him.
And not only that, it's present in Western folklore as well. It's in Western sort of spirituality, it has always existed, is when the Greeks first came up with the five elements, it was air, fire, water, earth, and ether. It was that same idea of this intangible, ephemeral element that was just very influential and important to humanity. And so it does come across as a little bit hippy dippy, like the fifth element is love. Man,
it's love, man.
But at the same time, it works because of the way this film is constructed. All the way from being a labor of love for Luc Besson to create, something he came up with as a 16-year-old kid, from the way Bruce Willis was willing to take a cut rate to do the film, from the investment that you see from the costume design, from the modeling work. Because of the investments in creating this highly stylized, kind of kitschy, kind of groovy future, they earn that very kind of cheesy moment there at the end, I personally feel. I understand that it's not your high art cinema. It's not Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, if you're looking at French cinema. But at the same time, there's a real value to doing a film like this, to doing something that isn't just big budget, but that has a real statement of creative intent behind it. And I think, I won't go on a rant here on this, but I do think we miss that with a lot of big budget films these days. A lot of stuff feels very cookie cutter now. A lot of stuff is very much geared towards, let's come up with X concept and then fit a story to it. Here, Luc Besson's conceptualization of the world is what wins out, I think. And maybe that is why, BK, this film divides so many people. This caught you off guard when we did our research, but believe it or not, Fifth Element is still considered one of the most divisive sci-fi films of all time.
That's so frustrating. It's like divisive. It's like you must be stuck in your old ways for you to not appreciate and enjoy this film. Like, I don't know why it's so polarizing.
Well, it's like you even put it right there. You see the vestiges of it as someone who likes it, is that you're very defensive for this film and on its behalf because it connected with you so strongly. And it's the same way I feel about it too. But there are people that find it very polarizing. Like, there are people who will refuse to acknowledge the Fifth Element as more than a guilty pleasure. Like, one thing that frustrates me is it comes up on lists of, people's favorite bad good movies or good bad movies, if you know what I mean by that concept. And it's frustrating to me because I think that we only really develop guilty pleasures as people because we're not willing to be honest with ourselves about liking what we like. And a big part of Fifth Element is that kind of that earnestness, is that you see the characters who are dishonest or who are duplicitous meet their comeuppance in rather silly ways. The Mangalores are rendered impotent the moment Bruce Willis puts a cap in their leader. Zorg, after getting foiled by the Stones and having to unset his bomb to try and find them a hotel, gets killed by another bomb. The people, the honesty and the earnestness by which the people in Fifth Element live in their own idiom, whether it is Corbin Dallas fighting for love, whether it is Lilu's journey, whether it's Ruby Rhod just being who he is, that authenticity is an important facet of this film. And it pains me that they will interpret this film while having to add those caveats that it's a guilty pleasure or that, oh, I know it's a bad film. Like, no, I think it's better to take the position that it is a good film and this is why I like it. Yeah, I think that the numbers back it up as well, BK, this is still to this day the most successful French film ever.
Wow. Wait, ever?
Ever.
Wow.
In terms of commercial success, critically, there has been stuff that has been more highly regarded, obviously.
Right, of course.
But at the same time, like Amélie, which we all think of in the film industry as being kind of synonymous with French film making a sort of worldwide impact, Amélie grossed 170 million globally. This grossed 270 million globally.
How you gonna say it's a bad film? I'm sorry, Jay.
No, I'm with you on this because even though 76% of that gross was made outside of the United States, when you figure in just the American gross, it's still the most successful French film ever in America. Like, there is something about Fifth Element that makes people gravitate towards it, and certainly did in 97. It was the 9th highest grossing film of that year. It, found itself nominated for bevies of technical awards. And to this day, the style of the film, the social aesthetics that they develop in their progressive society, you see its influence on modern sci-fi. Like, you and I kept commenting to each other, this world reminds us so much of the Mass Effect series.
Oh, totally. It's Mass Effect written all over it. Are you kidding me? It's beautiful. They had to have drawn inspiration from The Fifth Element. Absolutely.
I think so. Even though the joke is that a million different pieces of sci-fi have references from a million different other pieces of sci-fi, you do see strong connections like that. And I think maybe that's the lasting testament we need to take from this film. It's not so much about how you react to the story. It's just that the labor of love and the investment in the aesthetic is truly an impressive feat of filmmaking. And it's something that I think is something filmmakers should really aspire to. If you're going to do that high-minded sci-fi concept, make it your own like this. Don't be afraid to design things that are transgressive. Don't be afraid to do a film that people consider aberrant or odd. There's too little time and too much expression to be done to hold back. And the fact that The Fifth Element doesn't hold back is, I think, a great, great testament to the work that Luc Besson and his team did on this film. And BK, I think that's why we need to get now to our rating space.
Okay, ratings time. Oh man, I'm so interested to hear what you have to say. After literally just swooning over there on the end there. I had to let you go off. I was like, yo, you saying it. Like, I'm in my head like, You tell him, Jack. Ratings time. Okay. For me here, I'd have to say, combined with the world building and amazing strong female lead here, and now knowing the behind the scenes kind of bumped up my perspective of the work, to be completely honest. I'm going to have to give it a solid 8 for me in my book.
I like it. I honestly, in thinking about this film, I've been giving it that exact same rating in my head. Did I not say on the Raiders podcast when we disagreed that we were going to agree on this one?
Oh my God, you called it.
I'm going to take credit for that one. But, I give it that 8 because, I obviously, it's very clear if you're listening to these first 5 episodes that I have a good amount of pretension about me when it comes to film. I love the art. And so I delve into the craft with a lot of zeal. And it means that you end up, in a lot of the ways, you lose sight of the films that are not trying to be that high concept. You lose the ability to enjoy them sometimes when you go into deep film criticism. And I think that's a tragedy. I think that this film succeeds because while it is imperfect and while the first act does drag a little bit when you're getting that character development, which is, I think, where my 2 stars go off, there is something to be said for the type of film that you can just sit down and consume. I have seen this film in part more times than I can count. There have been times when I've turned on in the airport scene. I'm like, okay, we got to watch the second act of Fifth Element. There are times when, I've turned it on and it's been the scene where Lulu comes crashing through the cab. I'm like, oh, this is a great scene. I'm going to get into the Fifth Element here. And I think that films like that are always going to have a place, but I think they only work when you have a level of critical and personal investment in them, where they are more than just selling a commodity, when they are something that means a great deal to the people behind them. That's what makes those kind of films special. And ironically, despite the fact that this is one of maybe the least French films of all time, it is still an auteur-style effort. It is helmed by Luc Besson and his vision, and it comes through brilliantly, and he's going to get an 8 out of 10 here.
Oh, totally. Like I said, The Fifth Element is an experience. So, I can't even say that it is just a film I've watched. I was a part of it. So, if you have not watched this, again, I cannot implore you enough. Go check this out, rewatch it again. I will tell you, you're going to have a newfound appreciation for it, 110%.
I think so. And if you are one of those people who, when you like your French cinema, you like it small and insular, you like it being a contained story, next week's not coming from France, but it is a smaller contained drama, so you're going to get what you want to. Is BK, I've gotten away with it another time. I've talked you into watching one of my favorite films of all time. Is we are going back to 1979, and we are going to check out Bob Fosse's All That Jazz.
Oh, I'm so excited for this. I am a big musical head. I grew up doing musical theater, so I know of this. I've seen it maybe once, so I am super stoked to watch this again and watch it with you, knowing it's one of your faves. So next week is going to be extra, extra juicy.
It's going to be juicy too, because it is a musical, but it is so not a musical in so many ways. It is, All That Jazz. It's a title. More people are familiar with that name from The Number in Chicago than they are from this film. It's kind of one of those films that has been forgotten by a lot of people, despite the fact that in 1979, All That Jazz was nominated for Best Picture alongside Apocalypse Now and Kramer versus Kramer. It was a widely, highly regarded critical film, but it's been lost in the years. Maybe it's because people know Bob Fosse primarily as a choreographer. Maybe it's because it is one of those smaller dramas, in addition to being a musical, that people kind of struggle to focus on. But it is a really valuable film, and it's one I don't think people should miss. And so I cannot wait to bring it to you next week.
Yes, me too, Jack. I am actually super stoked for All That Jazz next week. So I don't even want to look into it yet, because I'm ready to experience it. And I hope you guys are all ready to experience it too. And thank you guys so much for listening to us these past weeks. We've been having so much fun bringing these to you, and we only get better and better. So those of you who make it to the end, we love you. Much love, appreciation. Come back next time.
And we will continue to bring more and more content to you. We're starting to do some shorter form stuff on our Twitter. You can find us at RFN_podcast. We have been getting into our Twitter groove a little bit. And you can find this podcast everywhere it is played. We are on pretty much everything now as we're getting ready for what we're considering our wide release. We've done the limited previews, BK, and now we're moving this thing out to a bigger and wider audience. And it is just a beautiful project. This gets better for me every week. I don't know about you, but I'm having a blast.
I'm having so much fun here. And I know that you guys love to hear us in the podcast, but also outside of the podcast. So, Jack, let them know where they can find you at.
Yes, absolutely. WUW Wrestling has gotten an opening date from September 2nd. Gleason's Gym in Brooklyn will be open, so we will be training when we can and hoping to bring you that wrestling content that you all crave. And you can find us on Twitch, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook at WUW Wrestling. You can also find us on YouTube as well. And for me, you can find me at Manly Jack Manly, MANLY on the first one, MANLEY on the second one. And I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook as well. And BK, where are they going to find your content?
Oh, you already know that your girl is live on Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, and all the things that are Discord. So please find me at Black Crystal, hang out, say hi, let us know what you think about the podcast. Yes, please give us your feedback, give us your suggestions. Like, we are still compiling movies for all of the episodes that we're doing. So we'd love to hear what you guys have to say. So I can't thank you guys enough for hanging out with us. This is it for this week. I am Black Crystal.
And I am Jack Manley. We are moving onward and upward. Thank you so much for joining us. Peace and chicken grease.
Janet.